The water shimmered. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees. It was a perfect evening for a pint at the local. My husband and I sat in the car enjoying the view. We were parked by the water just outside the pub. The air was still, filled with the promise of a relaxing evening. We chatted idly, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. The light painted the water in shades of orange and gold. It was a scene of utter tranquility, a moment of peace in a hectic world. Little did we know that this peaceful scene was about to be shattered, and not in a good way. Now, my husband is a kind soul, an animal lover through and through. He wouldn't hurt a fly, literally. In fact, he'd probably try to rescue it. I've seen him scoop spiders out of the bath and usher wasps out of the window. He's just wired that way. So when I say he likes to help all animals, I mean all animals. Birds, bees, squirrels, you name it. If it's small and furry or feathered, he's there ready to lend a helping wing. This innate desire to save every creature in need would, as you can imagine, lead to some interesting situations, and tonight was no exception. A sudden thud broke the silence. It seemed to come from the direction of the pub wall. We both turned, startled, trying to locate the source of the noise. There on the ground lay a pheasant. It was a strange sight. Pheasants aren't exactly known for their urban adventures. The poor thing looked dazed, its feathers ruffled. It must have flown into the wall in a moment of confusion. My heart sank. I knew exactly what was coming next. My husband, bless his cotton socks, would insist on rescuing it, and I, being the ever-patient wife, would go along with it. Little did I know this rescue mission would turn into a hilarious fiasco. My husband, ever the hero, sprang from the car. He hurried towards the dazed pheasant, his brow creased with concern. I sighed inwardly. I could see the cogs turning in his head. "Poor thing," he muttered, bending down to examine the bird. It must be terrified. I knew that look. It was the look of a man on a mission to save a feathered damsel in distress, and there was no stopping him. I reluctantly unbuckled my seatbelt. I might as well get involved now. This was going to be interesting. "Right," my husband declared, scooping up the pheasant with surprising gentleness. The bird didn't struggle, which was either a testament to my husband's calming aura or the severity of its concussion. "We need to get this little fella to safety." He looked around, as if expecting a sign from the heavens. "There's a nature reserve about 15 minutes from here. Lots of trees, plenty of cover. Now, I'm not one to judge, but driving a dazed pheasant to a nature reserve in the dead of night wasn't exactly how I envisioned spending my evening. Still, I could hardly leave the poor thing to fend for itself, so I agreed. Besides, a small part of me, the part that secretly enjoyed a good dose of chaos, was curious to see how this would unfold. "I'll wrap him in my jacket," my husband announced, already shedding his outer layer. "You can hold him on your lap. Keep him warm, you know." I stared at him, my eyebrows reaching for my hairline. "On my lap?" I squeaked. "Are you sure that's wise?" He waved away my concerns with a confident grin. "Don't worry, he'll be fine. He's just a bit shaken, that's all." And so, we embarked on the most bizarre car journey of my life. My husband, with the air of a seasoned wildlife rescuer, carefully placed the bundled-up pheasant on my lap. The bird, still dazed, nestled into my jacket. It felt surprisingly soft and warm. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for the creature. It certainly didn't sign up for this. Neither, for that matter, had I. We set off into the night, our headlights cutting through the darkness. The hum of the engine was a comforting counterpoint to the strange cargo on my lap. The pheasant, swaddled in my husband's jacket, seemed to have settled. Its breathing was shallow but steady. I resisted the urge to poke it just to make sure it was still alive. My husband, ever the optimist, hummed cheerfully as he drove. "See?" he said, glancing at me with a self-satisfied smirk. "He's going to be fine. Just a quick trip to the nature reserve, then back to the pub for that pint." I nodded, trying to share his optimism, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that this rescue mission was far from over. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity in its own right. The pheasant remained still, a warm, feathery weight on my legs. I tried to adjust my position to ease the growing numbness in my thighs, but any movement, however slight, was met with a rustle of feathers and a muffled squawk from the bird. I froze, holding my breath until the pheasant settled once more. "Everything all right back there?" my husband asked, his voice laced with amusement. I could hear the smile in his voice, the hint of a chuckle. He was clearly enjoying this far more than I was. "Peachy," I muttered through gritted teeth. "Just living the dream here. You know, chauffeuring wildlife around in my spare time." As we drove, a wave of doubt washed over me. What were we doing? Driving a pheasant, of all things, to a nature reserve in the middle of the night? It seemed utterly ludicrous. This wasn't a cat stuck up a tree. This was a wild bird. Surely it would be better off left to its own devices, but then the pheasant shifted slightly, and I felt the delicate tremor of its body. It was alive, vulnerable, and utterly reliant on us. My resolve solidified. We'd come this far, we couldn't abandon it now. Absurd or not, we were on a mission of mercy, and I, for one, was determined to see it through to the end. The car journey continued. The pheasant, thankfully, remained still. The initial panic had subsided, replaced by a strange sense of camaraderie. We were in this together, the three of us, on this bizarre nocturnal adventure. The absurdity of the situation struck me, and I couldn't help but chuckle. My husband glanced at me, his eyebrows raised. "What's so funny?" he asked. I shook my head, unable to explain the sudden surge of amusement. "Oh, just thinking about this whole thing," I replied, stifling another laugh. "It's not every day you find yourself playing taxi driver to a pheasant." The car rumbled along the quiet country road. Outside, the scenery was a blur of dark fields and hedgerows. Inside, a strange peace had settled. The pheasant, still bundled on my lap, seemed to have drifted off to sleep. I dared to hope that the worst was over. My husband, bless his soul, had other ideas. "It's a bit stuffy in here, don't you think?" he remarked, his hand hovering over the air conditioning controls. "Maybe a little fresh air would do our feathered friend some good." I opened my mouth to protest, to remind him that pheasants weren't exactly known for their love of Arctic blasts, but it was too late. With a click and a whir, the fan roared to life, sending a blast of cold air through the car. The pheasant, rudely awakened from its slumber, did not react well to this sudden change in temperature. In fact, it reacted in the most dramatic way possible. It exploded. One minute it was a peaceful bundle of feathers on my lap, the next it was a feathered missile flapping wildly in the confined space of the car. A strangled shriek escaped my lips as the pheasant launched itself into the air. Up it went, flapping desperately, its wings beating against the car roof. It was like a scene from a Hitchcock film, only instead of menacing crows, we had a terrified pheasant, high on adrenaline and probably a little carsick. The car became a whirlwind of feathers and panic. The pheasant, clearly disoriented, flew erratically, bouncing off the windows, the dashboard, even my husband's head. It was chaos. Utter, feathered chaos. I shrieked again, this time with a touch of hysteria, as the pheasant swooped low, brushing my cheek with its wing. My husband, momentarily stunned by the avian assault, struggled to regain control of the car. "Don't panic!" he yelled, his voice barely audible above the din. "We just need to pull over." Easier said than done. With a pheasant playing kamikaze pilot in the car, pulling over safely suddenly seemed like an impossible task. I ducked as the pheasant took another loop around the car, this time leaving a rather unpleasant souvenir on the back seat. The air was thick with the smell of fear and something else, something distinctly less pleasant. "Oh, for God's sake," I cried, swatting blindly at the feathered projectile as it dive-bombed my head. "Just get this thing out of the car." My husband, his face a mask of concentration, wrestled with the steering wheel, trying to navigate the car to the side of the road. "I'm trying," he shouted back, his knuckles white as he gripped the wheel. "Just hold on." Holding on at that moment was about all I could do. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my husband managed to steer the car onto a grassy verge. He slammed on the brakes, bringing the vehicle to a stop. The pheasant, momentarily disoriented by the sudden halt, perched precariously on the dashboard, its chest heaving. We sat there for a moment, catching our breath, the silence deafening after the cacophony of the last few minutes. "Well," my husband said, his voice a shaky exhale. That was eventful. I could only stare at him, my mouth agape, speechless after the avian roller coaster we had just endured. The pheasant, as if nothing had happened, began to preen its feathers, seemingly oblivious to the chaos it had just unleashed. The pheasant, perched on the dashboard, surveyed its surroundings with a beady eye. It twitched its head, its feathers ruffled, as if trying to make sense of the situation. We, on the other hand, were still reeling from the avian tornado that had just ripped through the car. "Right," my husband said, taking a deep breath. "Time to get you out of here, my fine feathered friend." He reached out cautiously towards the pheasant, his hand moving slowly, as if approaching a volatile, explosive device. The pheasant, however, had other ideas. With a squawk and a flurry of wings, it took flight again, this time aiming for the open window on my side of the car. "No, not again!" I cried, instinctively ducking as the pheasant whizzed past my head. It careened off the passenger window, leaving another feathery imprint on the glass, before disappearing into the night. I could hear the frantic beating of its wings as it disappeared into the darkness. We scrambled out of the car, into the cool night air. The silence was almost eerie after the chaos of the car journey. "Where did it go?" I asked, my voice a breathless whisper. My husband, ever resourceful, whipped out his phone and switched on the torch function. "Don't worry," he said, his voice reassuringly calm. "We'll find it." And so began the great pheasant roundup. We searched for what felt like hours, our phone torches cutting through the darkness. We checked under bushes, behind trees, even peered into a nearby ditch, just in case the pheasant had crash-landed. But there was no sign of the runaway bird, just the sound of crickets chirping and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Just when we were about to give up hope, my husband let out a triumphant shout. "There it is!" he exclaimed, pointing to a clump of trees at the edge of the field. And there it was, our feathered fugitive, perched on a low-hanging branch, surveying the scene with an air of indignant superiority. It let out a loud squawk as if to say, "Well, that was fun, wasn't it? Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some pheasanting to do." We stood there for a moment, watching as the pheasant, now free from its automotive prison, melted into the undergrowth. The silence of the night descended once more, punctuated only by the distant hoot of an owl. We looked at each other, our faces illuminated by the faint glow of the phone torch, and burst into laughter. It was the kind of laughter that bubbles up from deep inside, the kind that leaves you breathless and slightly hysterical. The absurdity of the situation, the sheer ridiculousness of it all, hit us with full force. We had just spent the better part of our evening playing avian taxi service, only to have our feathered passenger stage a daring escape at the last minute. It was a story we knew we would tell for years to come, a tale that would grow more outlandish with each retelling. As we drove home, the car now suspiciously pheasant-free, I couldn't help but reflect on the evening's events. What had we learned? What wisdom had we gleaned from our feathered fiasco? The truth was, I wasn't quite sure. Perhaps it was a reminder that life is unpredictable, that even the most well-intentioned plans can go awry in the most spectacular fashion, or maybe it was simply a testament to the fact that sometimes you just have to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Life is too short to take everything seriously, especially when it involves runaway pheasants, hysterical laughter, and a car that would forever carry the faint aroma of avian adventure. In the end, I decided it didn't really matter what the moral of the story was. What mattered was that we had a story to tell, a story that would forever be etched in our memories. A story that never failed to elicit laughter and disbelief in equal measure. The next time we saw a pheasant strutting confidently across a field, we couldn't help but smile. It was a reminder of that chaotic, hilarious night, a night that proved that sometimes the most unexpected adventures are also the most memorable. And as for our feathered friend, well, I like to think it flew off into the sunset, forever scarred, or perhaps even slightly amused by its brief encounter with two well-meaning but utterly clueless humans.